good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Mike, check your Shantae Arnett. You guys have officially tuned in. Thank you guys for joining me. This is Essays with Essay. I appreciate all of you stopping by and giving my channel a view. If you are new, thank you so much for stopping by and giving me a little bit of your time. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Do all the things that your favorite YouTubers tell you to do in their videos. If you're returning to my channel, hey girl, welcome back. Thank you so much for stopping back by and giving me a little bit more of your time. I appreciate you. Shout out to every single person watching this video. Okay, today we getting ready to get into some things, okay? Because this video is heavy on my heart. I woke up straight out of bed and I just decided to jump and just go ahead and just clock in. I decided to just jump in and clock in because I went to bed last night with this subject really heavy on my heart. And I'm trying to not let things piss me off anymore. You know, if they affect me, they affect me. I'm human. But I'm trying to remain in control of what takes me out of a place of comfort and what just simply challenges me to create good work. So this video is about people feeling the need to step into nuanced issues that marginalized people face and try to tell us what we should and should not be offended about, okay? If you have never had to endure something, then you can't speak on why or how someone reacts to it, okay? I have a term that I've created that I feel like encompasses everything that I'm about to say and describes the type of person that does these kind of things. I'm gonna give you some examples, I'm gonna break it down for you, and then I'm going to introduce a new term for you guys, okay? So lock in while I clock in, because we getting ready to get into it. Like I said, this video is about people who aren't subjected to the things that they shame people for being offended about, okay? First example, and I'm gonna just start light with it. Black hair, okay? This is what sparked this video, a conversation about black hair, and I'm getting ready to really get into it. My first example is Gabrielle Union and her hair being policed at America's Got Talent. I saw an article that, you know, if you watched America's Got Talent, you all know what happened to Gabrielle Union. She was fired for speaking out against racial issues and she spoke out against racial issues and I believe sexist issues as well. And she was basically fired for standing up for herself as a person of color and as a woman. Well, details also came out throughout that report that the network that America's Got Talent airs on warned or reprimanded her several times about her hair, right? And according to reports, the word from the higher-ups that was used to describe the way that Gabrielle Union was wearing her hair was, quote-unquote, too black, right? And then, on top of seeing this report over the past few days, I posted an article about this because there was an article that came out that says, "Stop policing black women's hair." And I posted a comment on Facebook where I get into the majority of my social issues with people. Facebook is always like my #1 place to get into social injustice debates with people. So I post an article on Facebook that says, "Stop policing black women's hair." And my caption on there read as such, Yes, stop policing black hair. And on top of that, stop policing our hair and then wearing it. Okay? Stop policing black women's hairstyles and then calling yourself wearing them as fashion statements. Right? So, a person commented on my post and said that we should not be offended by white people wearing braids because it's just hair and it shouldn't be regulated. It's just hair and it shouldn't be regulated. I'm gonna come back to that. Put a pin in that because it's amazing how people can see a point for justifying their course of action, but not for the flip side of that. So we're gonna come back to that. In fact, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it, and I'm gonna bring it back up later. You say that it's just hair and that hair shouldn't be regulated, but you're saying that as a white person talking to a black person who was offended by you wearing a hairstyle that we were policed for. Okay? You're justifying the policing of... You're saying that hair shouldn't be policed when a white person wears it. You're saying that it's okay for black people to be fired from jobs, put out of schools, and all other types of just disgusting behavior. But it's okay when y'all do it and we shouldn't police you doing it. Okay, you just made my point, but we're gonna come back to that. Another example, and mind you, all of this happened in the same week. So I felt like this was the universe telling me that I should be making a video about this. And so in the same week, the rapper Bad Baby goes on Instagram and she gets into this whole debacle about her wearing box braids. And she tries to justify wearing box braids with black people wearing weaves from other countries, the Brazilians, the Peruvians, the Malaysians, and saying that we shouldn't be offended. I had to make another comment about this because I actually saw this on another Facebook post and I made a comment about this. And somebody was trying to say that they don't understand why this is a thing. And this was another black person saying like, well, she made a point because I'm over here wearing Brazilian hair right now. And she couldn't understand what was wrong with Bad Baby saying that nobody says anything when black women straighten their hair. Nobody says anything when y'all wear weaves and this, that, and the third with hair from other countries. Here's the thing. Let me just go ahead and wrap that up right now. Black hair has been the main, if not the only, hair or culture that has had their hair policed. In this country, it's the only one that I can think of. If there are other examples, please let me know in the comments of other culture groups who have had the way that they wear their hair policed by authority figures in this country. Okay? Brazilian, Peruvian, Malaysian, Vietnamese, Indian, Remy, Yaki, all them other, whoever, any other country that we buy hair from has never been policed and regulated and told that you cannot get a job because you have this type of hairstyle. You cannot be in this school right now. Your style of hair violates our school dress codes or whatever the case may be. You've never had to have your dreads cut, your locks cut from your head before you were allowed to compete in a sporting event where your hair was covered. So I don't give a damn about black women wearing Brazilian, Malaysian, Peruvian. Do you know why that started as a thing? It started as a thing because black women were forced to assimilate to European and Caucasian stereotypes in order to get work. We had to assimilate to European and Caucasian beauty standards in order to progress in this country, because as an oppressed nation of people, we were kept from thriving in this country for things that were as little as the way that we wore our hair, braids, locks, afros, our natural curls, things like that. Okay? I went off on this because I don't understand how someone can justify marginalization with marginalization. I don't understand how you can say hair shouldn't be regulated, but you're endorsing the regulation of black hair, but you're going against the regulation of white people wearing black hair. Okay? And this started off, I was going to make an extra episode of a POC POV this week just to cover this topic, but then I sat back and I realized, as I was writing notes about this, I realized that there are more examples of this happening that don't just subscribe to black people. I realized that this started as a black thing, but this subject can be made much bigger than that. And this can be something that does not just affect black people. I'm gonna give you a few examples of things that do affect black people, and then I'm gonna transition into some examples that don't completely affect black people. It affects some black people. Blackface. People trying to tell black people that we shouldn't be offended by blackface. Let me go ahead and start these examples off with this. Again, if you have not been subjected to oppression for the thing that you are saying that we shouldn't be offended about, then you should be saying nothing. Okay? If you have never been policed for wearing your hair, if you have never been reprimanded on your job for wearing braids, if you have not been oppressed as an overall culture, then you cannot tell the oppressed how we should be reacting to things, okay? So blackface. Just a few years ago, the news lady came on the scene talking about how she doesn't understand why blackface is a thing and why people are so offended, and you know, we should be able to do it. White privilege. Chelsea Handler just made an entire documentary about it, which was freaking amazing, streaming on Netflix right now. Go watch it. Hello, privilege, it's me, Chelsea. Where she tried to expose how ignorant white people were about white privilege, and whether that ignorance was they just don't know, or they know and they refuse to acknowledge. She wanted to turn the mirror on the country and show America what white privilege is, how people are directly affected by it in minorities and in non-minorities. And she wanted to really show people exactly what the hell it is that helped her benefit in this country. And I commend her and I take my hat off to her for that. I would actually take my hat off, but I haven't brushed my hair and I don't see my brush. Actually, it's right there, but I just don't feel like getting up. Moving on, the N-word. How all of this started, how my whole YouTube endeavor started, the N-word. I get that black people sold the word nigga back to white people in music. I get that. But what I'm not going to accept is you telling me that I shouldn't be offended by it because you heard it in a rap song. What I'm not going to accept is you trying to tell me that the word isn't a big thing when the word never affected you in the first place. I'm not going to accept that the couple black people in your life who may or not be informed about their own history and their own culture tell you what's okay for an entire race of people to accept. Okay? Let's move on to some non-Black issues that this type of behavior impacts. Abortion, okay? People regulating what women should or shouldn't do with their bodies, or people with reproductive organs, what they do and do not do with their bodies. Because, you know, this conversation is generally about women, but I would never exclude a trans man out of a conversation about reproductive organs and female body parts. So the country trying to regulate what women do and don't do with their bodies and trying to tell us that it's for the betterment of our country and the reason why you shouldn't be doing it is because it goes against God. First of all, what happened to church and state? Second of all, you're trying to exclude people who become pregnant under extreme circumstance in this instant, and you're also trying to marginalize and box women into one avenue of getting pregnant or one or two ways of getting pregnant. Like, you're saying that you're basically saying that women aren't allowed jurisdiction over their own wombs and that they should be okay with it because in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of God, that saving a life that isn't developed is more important than saving yourself as a person. I'm specifically talking about extreme cases where people become pregnant, i.e. rape, i.e., you know, things like that, where it was not a choice, it was not an accident, it was not just a mistake somebody made to get pregnant. I'm talking about extreme cases. And even in not extreme cases, you should have the choice to do what you want to do with your body. Because if you get pregnant by accident with somebody that you're in a relationship with and you decide that this isn't for you or that, you know, having a baby wasn't in your plan right now, you should be able to decide whether you should want to get an abortion or not. Just my opinion on it. Gay marriage. You trying to regulate who cannot marry who in this country and say that you're honoring the eyes of God, so we shouldn't be offended by it. We're going to get into religion and God in another video. Stay tuned for a POC POV today, because we're going to be talking systematic oppressionary setups, and I'm going to cover religion in that. So stay tuned. But you can't regulate how people marry and tell them and give them a reason for it. Like you two men can't get married. You two women can't get married. This black man and this white woman, or this white woman and this black man can't get married because it goes against the values of this country. Okay, I'ma just keep it pushing. Trans issues, such as medical care, documentation, even down to the issue of bathrooms and security safety for trans individuals just trying to use the bathroom in the space that they identify. You're trying to regulate how somebody lives their life in the gender expression that they identify with. And just because, and just because you feel a type of way about it, you want to regulate how a person feels comfortable in their own skin and in their own body. It's disgusting. You're trying to regulate who gets medical care and how, who can have proper documentation that reflects their identity and how. You're trying to regulate who can go to what bathroom and who can do what and who can, like, and then to try to use the reasoning of children. I spoke about this in another video where gay people and queer people are regulated to pedophiles and child molesters and child predators when the hierarchies or the powers at be want to try to tell us where we can and can't go and what we should and shouldn't do. You know, it's always the most extreme example of what could happen. Like, gay people are the only people who have ever molested people. Like, queer people are the only people who have ever been child predators. We can pull up the statistics. While I'm saying that predators of the LGBT community don't exist, I'm not saying that they are the only predators that reside in this country. There are plenty of grown-ass adults who prey on children who are not of the LGBT community. So stop trying to marginalize us into that because you don't want us in your spaces, okay? Non-marginalized people, listen up. This goes for traditionally, this goes for cis white people. This goes for cis white males specifically. Usually, I would direct this comment directly at cis white men. But I've seen these actions from white women. I've seen these actions from black people. I've seen these actions from queer people. I've seen it all at this point. So I can't, you know, you would think that I would be talking about the cis white men when I talk about marginalizing people, but at the end of the day, I've seen people of the marginalized communities try to shame me for speaking up about these issues. We'll talk about that. But non-marginalized people, listen up. Stop trying to argue the points of marginalized people with opinions of what should be or how things should be, okay? The reality is, this ain't a perfect world, and what you're talking about is irrelevant to the context of the situation. Because in a perfect world, there are a lot of arguments and discussions and causes that we wouldn't be fighting for because we wouldn't have to fight for them, right? There's a lot of things that people who aren't marginalized or oppressed or affected by certain situations, they try to trivialize the plights of other people because they don't understand it and try to minimalize it and make it seem minute and minuscule. Time's up for that shit. Because based on the foundations, beliefs, and principles that this country was built on, we have to have these conversations because the inequalities and injustices exist. At the end of the day, I don't want to be sitting here making a video about being marginalized and people telling us that we shouldn't feel offended because you don't get the marginalization. I don't want to sit here and be making videos about what it's like being black in America. I don't want to sit here and be making videos about what it's like being queer in America. But the conversations need to be had. And we need to be talking about it because at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit around and enable the oppressor. I'm not going to sit and say that not saying anything is okay and just ignore them. No. I'm not going to enable anybody. Stop trying to tell people not to be offended because something shouldn't be the way that it is. If it wasn't that way, we wouldn't have had an issue. The conversations are being had because the situations are what they are. We're having a conversation about black hair because black hair is marginalized and then appropriated as a fashion statement. We're having a conversation about all of these things because they exist. Why would black people just pull these things out of the sky and create narratives that weren't true? Why would we oppress ourselves if we weren't actually oppressed? Don't you think that we would want to live in the laps of luxury and enjoy the fruits of our labors just like anybody else? At the end of the day, there are certain fruits of our labors that we aren't even subjected to because we are discriminated against in this country. So there are certain things that we're just gonna have to talk about because that is our norm and that is what it is. So if you have a problem with it, unfollow me, unsubscribe, delete me, block me, whatever the case may be, because you're not going to silence me. That's what's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna never speak up for the communities that I'm a part of. I'm never gonna not speak up for the communities that I'm not a part of, but that are still marginalized. I'm never going to not speak up for marginalized and oppressed people. Period. So you can hang it up if by coming in my comments and my inboxes telling me that people like me are just giving oppressive people what they want, giving them a reaction. It's not about giving somebody a reaction, being pissed off, giving everybody the reaction that they want, because I've realized, you know what? I'm growing as a person. And while my first reaction would have been to pop off about some shit, I decided I'm going to educate the people. And I'm going to let you know exactly what the fuck it is and why the fuck it is. And I'm going to speak up for the people who can't speak for themselves or who don't have the audacity, the boldness, or the don't give a fuck to speak up for themselves. Okay? Examples of you trying to tell us that we shouldn't be offended by situations that are our plight. White people saying, I don't agree that white people can't wear braids because no one should be judged for a hairstyle. I'm getting tired of people trying to condemn someone for calling out a social injustice and then giving the excuse of, well, it shouldn't be an issue in the first place. It shouldn't be a problem in the first place. We shouldn't be talking about it in the first place. Well, guess what? We're talking about it because it is an issue. It is. So just because you don't feel like it's an issue, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect other people. So shut the fuck up, learn something, or get the fuck out of the way, okay? You can't be an ally of the victim and say that it shouldn't be an issue and then be an ally of the villain by arguing with the person calling out the problematic action. If you feel that something should not be an issue, take up the confrontation with the people who are making it an issue instead of the people who are trying to combat the problem. If you have an issue with white people wearing braids, if you have an issue, if you have an issue with black people having a problem with white people wearing braids, then you need to talk to white people about marginalizing black hair. You need to talk to white people about why black people feel this way. Don't come at black people and tell us that we shouldn't be offended that you guys have fired us, put us off of jobs, put us out of schools, and have regulated the way that we wear our hair and forced us to assimilate to a Caucasian standard, that we shouldn't be offended by you now appropriating our hairstyles, calling it something else, trying to claim it as a new invention, and say that it's a fashion statement. If Keisha got fired for wearing braids, if Lil Taylor gets sent home from school because she has an afro or because she has her afro puffs or because she has braids, if Quan is sent home from school because he has dreads, locks, because there's nothing dreadful about locks. Let's just be clear. You can't tell us that we should not be offended by it and then come to school the next day with some fucking cornrows in your head. Okay? The types of people that do this, who sit here and call the offended people out and use language that seems to align with the plight of the offended, but you're defending the oppressor, these are the type of people who, in the majority, align with the villain, but they don't want to be held accountable with the responsible party committing the wrongdoing. So they use wording as if they're aligning with the victim, right? You're saying that as a white woman, you're telling me, a black person, that I shouldn't be offended by white people wearing braids. It's just a hairstyle. It shouldn't be an issue. That color should never be an issue. You're telling me, the black person that's affected by this, right? That's what you're telling the offended and the oppressed party. So let me break this down really quick and tell y'all what y'all are doing. And just in case you don't know, y'all can address this type of behavior and move on. So as a white person, you're telling me that as a black person, I shouldn't be offended by a hairstyle being policed and regulated by Caucasian authority figures, but then on top of that, I should also be okay with then seeing said hairstyles paraded as fashion statements on the heads of Caucasian people who regulated the hairstyle for me in the first place? Huh? I'm sorry, what? How, Sway? How? Make it make sense. Because you're telling me that, yes, policing hair should not be an issue when it's white hair that's being policed, right? You're telling me that policing hair shouldn't be an issue for white people. You refuse to acknowledge the fact that black hair has been policed for years and years on end, but the moment white people get called out for wearing the exact same hairstyles that they try to prevent us from wearing, now policing hair is an issue. I want to go all the way with that and say, if that's the case, we need to police it all the way. If you want to police braids so bad, police white people for wearing them too. If you want to police dreads so bad, police white people for wearing them too. If you want to police afros, police white people for wearing them too. Because those are the people who should be policed for wearing these hairstyles. At the end of the day, all of the hairstyles that I just listed reflect the natural content or the natural context or grade of our hair. It's the natural state of our hair. It's how it grows out of our head. It is protective styles to keep our hair healthy. And yet, you're wearing them for fun and for fashion and for looks and for Instagram. Time's up for that shit, okay? You can't whitewash a marginalized cultural issue to defend actions of social injustice. You can't sit here. What I mean by whitewashing a marginalized cultural issue is basically saying everything that I've said. You can't tell black people that we shouldn't be offended by something that white people do when white people have policed, regulated, mandated, and restricted black people from doing the exact same thing with a cultural variable that started within our community in the first place. What you're trying to do is whitewash us out of our own culture. You're trying to take what is ours, say that we don't look good doing it, say that we look inappropriate doing it, saying that we look wrong doing it, and then turn around and let a white person come out and do it in a magazine and say that it's fashion. I'm not here for it. I'm never gonna be here for it, and I'm never going to sit here and tolerate it. Because at the end of the day, somebody's gonna have to speak out. Somebody's gonna have to speak up because I see the people who are affected by this. The articles wouldn't be out there if there weren't people affected. The news stories wouldn't be out there if people weren't affected. And yes, I get that there is selected outrage and there is people who do things to cause outrage within marginalized communities. But at the end of the day, I'm addressing the people who get called out for doing shit and then try to tell us that we shouldn't be offended because it shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. Well, you know what? Talk to the people who made it an issue in the first place, not the people who are suffering from the results of that being made an issue. I say all of this to say that actions like this, actions and perspectives on issues like this are defining a term that I like to call majority privilege. The reason I call it majority privilege is because nuanced issues that provoke marginalized communities are being poached, regulated, mandated by people who fit into the majority of this country and then try to tell us what we can and can't be offended by. You commit the offense and then tell us that we shouldn't be offended by it, right? A base definition for majority privilege is shaming someone for being offended by something they themselves are not oppressed by. This person also fits into the majority that's doing the oppressing. So for abortion, women are being oppressed by being told what they can and cannot do to their bodies. Men with majority privilege are telling them why they should not take issue with abortion law. White women, like Bad Baby, are wearing boxer braids, asserting majority privilege by telling Black people that we shouldn't be offended because you quote unquote appreciate the hairstyle, or that it's cultural appreciation, and that we shouldn't be offended because we straighten our hair and get perms or wear weaves. That is an example of majority privilege. And while I'm on the subject, let me address cultural appreciation real quick, because a lot of y'all try to slide under the radar and call something that is actually appropriation appreciation. And I don't think y'all realize what the difference is. And so I'm going to throw that out for you guys just as a bone so that hopefully y'all can get it together. Cultural appreciation is engaging in an activity that is predominantly seen in a culture, engaging in an activity that is specifically regulated to a specific culture, but recognizing the root of that activity. So for me, an example of cultural appreciation would be if someone wanted to dress as a Native American for Halloween, right? The way that I can see somebody executing that is if they dressed in traditional Native garb and expressed exactly what the history was behind this costume. Talk about the tribe express what tribe the costume came from, know some history, things like that. Like, if you're gonna engage in an activity, attribute the activity to the culture that you're taking it from. Point blank, like bottom line. If you're going to appreciate a culture, then appreciate a culture by attributing the activity that you're engaging in to the culture that you're appreciating it from. Okay? That is cultural appreciation. Cultural appropriation is what the majority of y'all do, is y'all sit here and do our shit, wear our styles, take our moves, and then tell us that y'all created it. Or tell us that what we're doing is not what you're saying that we're appropriating. We're doing this instead of this. It's new, it's different. This isn't this, when it's the exact same. And we see it. We aren't stupid. So let's not even do that, okay? If you're going to do something, just appreciate where it comes from and acknowledge the history behind what you're doing. Okay? It's a fine line. In closing, I want to touch on one more group of people, because this whole video has been about people who aren't affected by the oppressionary actions of others and the majority privilege that a lot of people tend to exude because they don't have to deal with the issues. You know, Jada Pinkett said this on Red Table Talk one time, and it stuck with me for a long time. I'm sure I probably heard it before then, but the last time I remember hearing it is Jada Pinkett Smith say this. She says, people usually don't give a fuck until they have to give a fuck. People aren't going to give a fuck about your issues until it becomes their issue. So I want to take a moment to address the people who are marginalized and who are affected by these oppressionary actions, but try to say that they don't understand why speaking up about it is a thing because they don't get offended by slurs directed at their community. I want to talk to the people who say that we are giving people power by talking about the fuck shit that they do, and that we should just ignore them and not speak about the types of actions that these people are taking. This is what I meant earlier when I said I'm not going to enable somebody to oppress me. You know what I'm saying? It's not about selected outrage. It's not about causing a stir to get black people angry or whoever angry, or to get queer people angry, or to get trans people angry. It's not about that. It's about the fact that these oppressionary actions and these disgusting ass habits and ways of being have been around before social media. They've been around before Instagram and all these other things, to where people could say, oh, they're just posting this for a reaction. They're just doing this for clickbait. They're doing this to get a reaction. So what about when they were doing it in the 50s? What about when they were lynching black people in the 50s? Was that just to get a reaction out of black people who they didn't consider a whole human being in the first damn place? What about Jim Crow? What, were the Jim Crow laws just something to get a rise out of us? I don't get that. Like, speaking for yourself is one thing, and if you don't get offended by something, good for you. There's a lot of terms and things that I personally don't get offended by, even though my community is affected by it. Like the word faggot, like the word nigga, this, that, and the third. I personally don't get affected by being called those things, but I also recognize the impact that me as a person who falls under the guidelines of being that, not saying anything, what type of impact that can give to the people who are affected by it. Especially somebody who wants to stand on a public platform. I'm somebody who chooses to be a public figure. I'm somebody, and don't drag me for that, because public figure is a strong word. I'm not famous. I'm not recognizable on a grand scale by any means necessary. But what I'm saying is that I base my career in the entertainment field, and I base my career field and the work that I do in a public setting. So, as somebody who wants to be a figure for the public, I have to be a figure that stands for the public as well. Like, I can't be somebody who just subscribes to these narratives of the black person, the Hispanic person, the Afro-Latina, the queer person, the non-binary person, the trans person. I can't fit under all these labels and not speak for them when they're oppressed. I look like a fucking hypocrite. And I look like somebody who is living as a stereotype. If you don't condemn these actions, you're saying that they're okay. And with people like Nigel Baker killing themselves just this year, like, you can't say, somebody tried to tell me that these things aren't a big deal anymore, that the word faggot isn't a big deal anymore. It's not a hot button word anymore. Just because they don't get offended by it, it's not a hot button word. In their community, in their friend circle, they don't experience that. So they did not think that it was a big deal. I need people, marginalized and non-marginalized people alike, because that is a version of majority privilege. Whether you're gay or not, and you just aren't around people who say the word faggot, or you're just not offended, that's a version of majority privilege, because you're sitting here telling us what we should and should not be offended by. Okay? Speaking for yourself is one thing, but you can't use your personal opinion to take a stance for an entire community. You can't tell me that I shouldn't be doing these shows because you don't get offended by it. Your point of view is not the status of America. Like, just because you don't get offended by something, and just because even I may not get offended by something, doesn't mean that there aren't people who are killing themselves, who are hurt, who are going through it, who are bullied, who are dealing with this shit every fucking day. At the end of the day, there are children watching us every motherfucking day who are going through the same things that we are. I know right now, there's probably some 13, 14-year-old kid right now watching this and understanding exactly where I'm coming from, because they get called a nigga or a faggot in school. And people tell them that they shouldn't be offended by it. With people like Nigel Baker killing themselves, you can't tell me that these issues aren't prevalent. There are still kids out there committing suicide to this day because of actions like this. Because of the shit that people like y'all put people through. And tell them that they shouldn't be offended by it. So they try to be strong and they don't say anything and they hold it all in. And then they go home and then they kill themselves. Or they fuck around and they bring a gun to school and they shoot y'all motherfucking ass up. Quiet as it's kept, I haven't seen a mass shooting that was conducted by a black person, but I want to know how many mass shootings were conducted by gay people. I want to know if there was a school shooting that was conducted by a gay person that got called a faggot one too many times. I'm sure that the people who bring guns to school to shoot up the fucking school, it's because they get to a point where they've been so oppressed and so bullied and so marginalized and so hated on in their environment, to no one doing anything about it, to people just telling them to ignore them, that they snap and they hit a wall. And eventually they want to come to school and just get their education and not deal with this type of bullshit. They want to come in and get their few hours of learning and get the fuck on about their business. So they show up and they decide that they're going to get rid of the people who are making school hell for them. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that I understand the thinking. Because eventually you get pushed to a level where you can't take it anymore and something has to be done. When I snapped, I created a YouTube channel. When I snapped, I created 3 shows to address the issues that people face in America. When I snapped, I created a POC, POV, and my queer view, and essays with essay. When other people snap, they shoot up the motherfucking school. They kill people. They kill you, your mama. They do all that shit. So you just got to be careful of the type of environment that you put people in and how safe you make people feel. Because I will never let anyone tell me that I shouldn't be speaking up for marginalized people. I will no longer engage with these types of people who enable oppressive behavior and not condemn it because they don't get offended. I'm not engaging with people who are telling me not to speak up for the people who are affected by it because they feel that if you say something, you're giving it life or you're giving it power. I feel quite the opposite because you're speaking from somebody, you're speaking from the perspective of somebody who only grew up in social media and saying that, oh, if you post about this, you're only giving the person that posted it life. If you comment on this person's status, you're giving the person life. At the end of the day, this shit happens in real life to this day. I can sit here and give you examples of me experiencing racism in my very own life, in person, in flesh-to-flesh contact. I can give you examples of me being called a faggot to my motherfucking face. I can give you examples of people running down on me, calling me nigga to my motherfucking face. Okay? This shit ain't just on social media where you can just click off and you can choose not to be offended because that's just one person in the grand scheme of millions of people who are on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. This shit is still happening in schools where children are being bullied every day. This shit is still happening in workplaces. This shit is still happening on the street. Okay? This shit is still happening in every space. So while I believe that we are not far enough removed from the oppression to have a complete reset to where these things will stop happening in its entirety, I feel like we aren't far enough removed from the inception of the oppression to say that it can completely go away. But what I will say is that I'm going to address as many people as possible because I've had the conversations with people where they've had their aha moments and say, wow, I never looked at it that way. I never saw it that way. I can understand your point of view. I respect what you're saying. And I didn't realize how I was coming off to people because I was so affected by my own perspective. I've had those conversations with people coming up to me and thanking me for saying things. Even since I've started these videos, I've only been doing these videos a week or two at this point. But I have gotten messages and responses from people telling me thank you for saying something. Thank you for having these conversations because people don't believe me when I say that this shit is oppressive or that this is what we go through or that this is what it's like. So until I see myself speaking for issues that aren't issues anymore, I'm gonna keep talking, okay? I'm never going to ignore an issue of a marginalized person, whether I fall under that group or not, just because it doesn't affect me or because I don't get offended by it. I'm never gonna not speak up for women just because I don't have reproductive organs. I'm not going to not speak up for things that aren't affecting me because they're still wrong. Even if they don't affect me, they could affect somebody that I know. And like I said before, and I've probably said in multiple videos, I check too many boxes to not speak for any and all people who feel like they suffer injustice in this country. Choosing to just ignore this type of behavior is saying that it's okay. It's being complacent. It's giving a rubber stamp and telling them that, oh, this behavior comes with no consequence or no repercussion, so I'm going to continue in it. I don't care if what the person is doing, I don't care if the person is doing it to provoke you or not. I don't care if they're doing it just to get a rise out of you. I don't care if they're doing it just to get a response out of you, because you never know who's watching. And you never know who is looking at your videos and what people are going through when they see them. And I'm speaking about me specifically, because when I post the things that I post, I don't realize how heavy they are until after the fact. I'm just kind of speaking about how I feel about something. And I'm a very passionate person, so I speak like I'm pissed about everything because I want to drive home a point of how important it is, right? And I'm not going to, because I'm that person, I'm not going to just walk by and say, oh, You're just trying to provoke me, so I'm going to ignore you and not tell you what you need to know as a person because I see what you're doing, right? No. What I'm going to do is not give you the reaction that you want, but I am going to educate you, especially on social media, because there are so many people who sit here and they do post things for clickbait and for reaction and to cause an outrage. But at the end of the day, there's a way to say and do everything without giving them the reaction that they want, but also holding them accountable. I'm going to educate you and give you the facts because, especially on social media, there are so many people watching, there are so many people reading, there are so many people who scroll through and see this that they take what you're saying and they appreciate it and they thank you for it. They thank you for speaking for them. Okay? So I'm going to always speak for people who are marginalized, who are oppressed, who suffer social injustice, because not standing up for yourself and not standing up for the people who suffer is relinquishing your power. And not standing up for the people in your greater community is sacrificing them to the people who hate us. Let me repeat that. Not standing up for yourself is relinquishing your power. It's enabling people, it's giving them permission to treat you any way that they see fit. And not standing up for your greater community, whether you are affected by their issues or not, if you see that something is wrong and you don't say anything or you don't try to at least encourage and empower the person being affected, at the very least, if you don't stand with your brother or sister, if you can't stand for your brother or sister, you are sacrificing that person to the people who are trying to oppress them. You are letting them fall by the wayside because you aren't affected. And that is falling into majority privilege because you fall into the group of people who are not affected by this issue, so you choose not to call it an issue. That is falling into majority privilege, and it's wrong. It's disgusting and it's wrong. I'm not saying that everybody has to get on a soapbox or create a YouTube channel to speak on issues. But what I'm saying is if you see something, say something. If you see something happening in your community that is wrong and that is offensive, if you can't even say something to the person who's doing it, at least say something to the person who's being affected and let them know that they're not alone and that they're okay. And also, someone tried to flip a point to me that I need to stop pandering to the people who are crying about the situation and that they need to learn how to toughen up. Let me explain something to you before I clock out of here, because I'm pulling in at an hour, but I had a lot of shit to say, and I could honestly keep going, but I'm running out of bullet points, but I do want to touch on this before I leave, because this isn't even in my points. It takes a strong person to get their ass on a camera and speak about issues that affect minorities in this country and that are condemning and reprimanding people who make up the majority of this country. It takes a lot of courage to speak up for the people who suffer these injustices, knowing that I'm clearly outnumbered. It takes a lot of courage to speak up for someone when you're not affected by their issue. And at the end of the day, the purpose of me making these videos is to encourage every single marginalized person to stand up for yourself and to acknowledge and to reprimand and to condemn the oppressive behaviors of the people who try to hold you back. Because There's a way to say and do everything. I'm not saying that if somebody calls you a faggot to beat their ass. I'm not saying that if somebody calls you a nigga to drag them. I'm not saying all of that. Not everything has to result in physical violence. There's a way to say and do everything. And me doing these shows are my way of doing it. Because if anyone who knows me knows I've been speaking up for years on Facebook. I've been speaking up for years on Instagram. I've been speaking up for years on Twitter. And a lot of the times I just come off as the angry person screaming at people for doing shit. But at the end of the day, it's like I see the reactions of people who see my words and know that I'm fighting for them. That's what a true activist and an advocate does. They fight for the people who need the voice. They fight for the people who need them. And I'm always going to be that person, no matter what. I'm always going to speak for people who are marginalized. I'm always going to speak for people who are considered less than because of who they are. So in closing, I will say this. Marginalized people. Marginalized and oppressed people. The closing of this show is for you, okay? That goes for gay people, all queer people, LGBTQIA, ABCDPFG, LMNOP. All LGBTQ people, all queer people, all people of color, all women, all anybody who has felt oppression and social injustice in this country. Do not let people try to talk you out of condemning offensive behavior. There is a way to say and do everything, like I said, but do not let anyone tell you that your pain does not matter or is not valid, or that it does not deserve to be acknowledged. Because at the end of the day, like I have said millions of times, intention is less important than impact. So somebody can tell you that they didn't mean something a certain way all day long, but if you took it a certain way and you felt a certain way by it, those feelings are valid and they need to be addressed. Because people do things unknowingly all the time and don't know how they come off. So do not let people try to tell you that you shouldn't speak up for yourself or speak up for other people who are being offended, oppressed, marginalized, whatever the case may be. Do not let anybody tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing with your pain, okay? Because I see you, I'm fighting for you, and there are plenty of people out here who are doing the same, and we see you. And I'm never gonna stop fighting for you, and I'm encouraging you to never stop fighting for yourself, okay? And with that being said, I'm getting ready to get out of here because I expected this video to be a quick 30-minute little drop, but this done turned into a whole hour shift, and I got a whole nother POV to record. So with that being said, marginalized people, stand up for yourself. People suffering from majority privilege, get your shit together and realize that there are more perspectives that matter than just your own. And mind your damn business. Like, treat people the way that you would want to fucking be treated and treat them like human beings, regardless of color, creed, race, sexuality, orientation, identity, gender, hair grade, hairstyle, whatever. Treat people the way that you want them to treat you, and you will always be in the right. Period. So with that being said, mic check is Shantae Arnett. I'm out. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Essays with Essay. This is episode 6. Please catch up on the rest of the episodes and watch my show, A POC POV, which airs on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and In My Queer View, which airs on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And episodes of Essay with Essay just drop as subjects drop in my heart. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all of the things that your favorite YouTubers tell you to do in their videos. Send this around to some of your favorite people. Send this around to people who you think will be affected by this. Send this to some people who you think should be watching this. Send this to people who you think are committing these types of behaviors, and send this video to people who you think aren't speaking up for themselves enough. Okay? So I'm getting ready to clock out, go on break. And I'll be back for another shift in just a little bit. All right? Peace.